welcome to our session, Guardians of the Galaxy, being a valued player in the talent mobility ecosystem. We're here first to weave in all of the brilliant comments that were made yesterday by the elegant and eloquent Francis Edmonds, as well as the Euro leadership, and Mr. McWilliams, who was our keynote speaker. So the goal today is to weave in those themes, and as Alistair said yesterday, the new mission of Euro is collaboration, education, joy, working together. So we hope you get a lot out of today's session. I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues Becky Woods from ADP and Karen Rehn. Please introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, Karen Rehn. I work with Equus Software. I've been in the mobility industry for 25 years or so now, and with Equus Software for the last almost 15. Glad to be here with you today.
Great, and hi, good morning. I'm Becky Woods. I oversee the global mobility and U.S. immigration programs at ADP. I've been in the industry a little over 16 years, and at ADP for about 6 years.
And I'm Susan Ginsberg. I'm the founder of SRG Advisory, which is my own consultancy. I've been in the industry for about 25 years. As Francis said yesterday, we're all heroes in the journey. As David McWilliams said, we're looking for the cracks. So today, we're going to be looking for the cracks in the system and to better ourselves. As mentioned, Alistair's new mission for Euro is collaboration, inspiration, education, and joy. And we're hoping today to do that with you, and unconventional thinking. Today, we're going to talk about attracting, influencing, and retaining interest from HR and corporate mobility decision makers, maintaining your hard-earned trust and credibility with those that engage your services, being a valued and consultative player as part of the supply chain. And we're also going to talk about what in the world an ecosystem means. And as Isabel said yesterday, it all comes down to radical collaboration. Expectations of partnerships are changing in the new world of work. The environments and digitization has emerged, especially during the pandemic, whether we like it or not. We've all been forced to embrace technology, as have our clients. So Karen, would you talk to us about the speed of change and shifting priorities?
Absolutely, thank you. So enhanced reporting, visibility of data and analytics. I don't know about all of you, but we constantly hear from our clients about data. They want all the data, be able to report on it, where it's going, what's happening, what are trends. So that is very key for us to be able to have the data on whatever services we're delivering, as well as being able to share that, but also keeping it secure and following GDPR and other such guidelines.
Yeah, and speaking from the corporate side, data has become so important at ADP that about 5 years ago, we actually went on an HR digital transformation journey. And as part of that, we actually implemented a new role within the HR department and hired a head of HR data and analytics. And that's his sole focus and his team's sole focus in the organization, because we get so many requests now just to report compliantly and accurately on our HR data.
Yeah, great point, ladies. And we'd love to, again, a lot of interaction. Ask questions while you have them, when you have them. First, we're going to ask for a show of hands. With the emergence of digitization, as I said earlier, in some cases, whether we liked it or not, who has found over the last few years that digitization has become more of a need in your operation? We'd love to see a show of hands. Oh, wow. Okay, so that's close to 100%. Thank you.
So leading that, 49% of digital transformation projects were not a priority before the pandemic, but became a priority as a result of the pandemic. Companies have accelerated the digitization of their customer data and interactions in their operations by 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, and speaking to what I talked about before, how we implemented this new HR data and analytics role within the company, we underwent a massive HR digital transformation beginning about 5 years ago. And really where they started for the particular focus of this project was they said, let's look at our HR business partner, our HR generalist role. How many different technology systems do they need to go into on a daily basis in order to do their job? And they found there were about 26 different systems they were going into. And they said, wow, there's some real low-hanging fruit we can tackle here as part of the HR digital transformation. So we see it in all different pockets, but you can find little wins, big wins across the board.
Thank you. Desire, we could say even a need for flexibility. So interesting statistic, 71% of employees said they would leave their job if offered flexible work hours in a new role.
Yeah, and we're seeing at ADP, for example, we've implemented a hybrid, 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. But even speaking more narrowly focused on the Global Mobility Program, where we had traditionally sent out a lot more long-term expatriate assignments. Now we're seeing a lot of people saying, I don't want to uproot my family, I don't want to disrupt the children. I'd like this to be a commuter assignment where I just go back and forth, but the family stays put. So lots of different types of requests kind of coming to the table to accommodate the flexibility. I know many of you have probably supported and heard of a lot more global remote workers. So people coming and saying, can I work up to 30 days, up to 60 days in another country because I want to be there for a personal reason, not because there's a business need. And we've been seeing that. We saw it before COVID a little bit. We saw it a lot during COVID. But what's interesting is the way that the requests are changing and becoming more elaborate scenarios. And my husband's on sabbatical from his work and going to travel to these 5 countries, and I'd like to go with him. And which of those 5 countries could I remote work in for a few weeks? And a lot of different kinds of, like I said, interesting and elaborate requests, and they're expecting the companies to accommodate that. So a lot of what we're doing in our day-to-day now is just a lot of the research around that, and really realizing and recognizing that it's not a one-size-fits-all program anymore. In the past, you used to have your traditional short-term assignment, long-term assignment. Now we've got the extended business travelers, the remote workers, the commuters, and again, each system is very unique, so flexibility is key.
So great points, both Karen and Becky. So in your own organization, and here we'd like to see a show of hands, as you're looking for talent in your own organization, are you finding that flexibility is playing more of a kind of key decision maker role to attract and retain talent? Well, we're close to 100%.
Yeah.
Same goes with your clients. Are you finding that your clients are also looking for more flexibility from you? Show of hands. Okay. And again, we invite you, we're not holding questions to the end. We invite you, if you have questions or comments, to please ask them as you have them.
And relates to sustainability, 69% of employees, I find this fascinating and very exciting. 69% of employees said the company's sustainability plan would affect their decision to stay with that company long term. So I love that the workforce is driving change. Certainly it's worldwide. There's all kinds of organizations and certifications about it. But the fact that the employees are driving it from within as well, I just love that.
Yeah, and at ADP, we have a lot of enterprise-wide initiatives for sustainability. But then there's this kind of trickle-down effect of, what am I doing in the Global Mobility Program? And there was a lot of great discussion at the Sustainability Symposium this week, and a lot of discussion around the Coalition for Greener Mobility. And I think, when I attend the corporate benchmarking sessions, we're always talking about what are you doing in your program from an ESG perspective. And a lot of the discussion is around discard and donate programs for your household goods shipments. Or can you do a virtual survey and maybe eliminate a home finding trip or less home leaves, things like that. And then we kind of stop there because we're not sure many times what else can we do. And we really want to lean on our supplier partners to say, what are you doing? My household goods shipper came to me recently with our annual review, and they said, we're planting X number of trees. And this is how many trees we planted, that as it exactly correlates to the ADP moves that we did. And I love when I get metrics like that, because then I can feed that back up to my senior leadership, because again, we're all part of one big supply chain to support these employees that are moving.
So Becky, I'm just curious, is that a deal breaker as you work with or identify service partners?
I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker, but I think the importance of it is increasing.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
And then just quickly on the DE&I objectives, thinking about how, again, within our mobility policies, how are we supporting our associates with different DE&I makeup? And maybe I need to move somebody who has a physical or mental handicap, or maybe they have a child with special needs, things like that. And so do we have programs and policies in place to support all different kinds of accommodations that may need to be made?
Related to consumer experience, really organizations are looking for that consumer-grade experience with focuses on AI, wearables, machine learning, as well as ease of use. And I know at Equus Software, we've the last few years really been focusing on that user experience with our software for each persona and making it more interactive and intuitive for them.
Well, I'd actually bring up a great point, Karen, and we're going to talk in a little bit about what an ecosystem is. And to your point, Karen, it's the customer who's at the center.
Yeah, and I feel like, we're so accustomed these days to really doing everything on our phones. And, when I want to order something on Amazon, it's on my phone. When I'm checking in for my flight, it's on my phone. And that's what people also want in their relocation experience. They want things like information 24/7. I want to be able to look at that information when I want to look at it. I don't want to wait till your business hours and when you're open. I have a very simple policy question. Can I just type it into a chat box, and a chat bot can give me the quick answer? And we've done a lot at ADP in general from the HR perspective, in terms of we just rolled out something called Ask Ava, where people can type in for their with their HR questions. And similarly, what can we do within our global mobility program?
Excellent.
26 of employees are seeking a new job because they want more benefits and support of their well-being. So they're really looking for more collaboration and more socialization tools. So as suppliers in this ecosystem, that's something we should all be conscious of and thinking about. Whatever services we're delivering, how can we be part of that? How can we collaborate and support the clients in that?
So what's interesting statistic, Karen, is 30% of employees are saying paramount to them, well-being matters. Are you finding that to be the case? Show of hands. So we've got about 60%. Yes, we have a question.
Just wanted to make a comment. I'm Yolanda from Situ. We actually, sorry.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dom.
Yolanda from Situ. We actually started doing this more and more. We actually have mental health ambassadors. So we're not huge. We have a team of 80, and we've just had 4 employees who spent 2 days in terms of mental health, and one of them actually had mental health issues herself, so she gives back to the company as well, which I think is the way forward for companies, especially as we grow.
Excellent, thank you for sharing that.
And even when we're thinking about, for example, DSP support, so these people are coming newly into a country, they might be needing to find local support to help deal with mental health issues, and how can we find them the resources that they need in order to be successful?
And it really is we, as the providers at the destination location, are providing that support and have the finger on the pulse of what the family and the transferee really needs. So it becomes incumbent upon us to be consultative back to the corporate HR decision maker.
Yeah. And even more than just mental health, just kind of this general duty of care. I know we're seeing at ADP an increased focus from our GSO organization, our Global Security Group, where they're tracking natural disasters that are happening around the world. And for example, when there was the hurricane in Puerto Rico, they identified all ADP employees who were there contacted them, asked them if they needed to be airlifted out, them and their extended families, to get them to a safe place and find them housing. Or when the war broke out with Russia and Ukraine, they immediately came to HR and said, tell us, do we have employees in Russia and the Ukraine? Let's account for them. How can we provide support to them? So this becomes important, especially from the global mobility lens, because again, we're dealing with these remote workers where people are saying, can I go on a personal vacation and work 20 days in this other country? Well, they're not accounted for necessarily in our HRIS system. We think they're at home in the US, but actually they're on vacation in Japan, but doing some work, so I know about them. So GSO and myself have become more linked in terms of if something happens in Japan, now they're going to come to me and say, do you actually have employees there right now that we need to make sure we're taking care of them?
So show of hands or comments here, are you getting more requests to safeguard and store your data and report on it? Okay, it looks like 40%. Any comments? Does anybody want to comment on that? The request from your clients, your corporate clients, to ensure that your data is safe and secure and to explain where it's stored. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll actually say that our procurement department's making a push. So when we're going out to RFP, we're renewing contracts, they're putting new questions in there about where, supplier, are you storing your data? Tell us which countries the data is stored in. Tell us your data purge, data retention, records management. How are you working with ADP to make sure you're not holding on to unnecessary data? So I am seeing kind of an increased importance coming down. Obviously, it's from senior leadership making its way to procurement and will start making its way into the RFPs.
So has anyone experienced, I'll ask that question a little differently, is anybody experiencing, are you having requests from your clients about safeguarding your data and what that means for the client experience? A comment?
I would just say that it's becoming a question of hygiene. You just need to have it. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say that it's becoming a question of hygiene. You have to have your IT systems and your data secured. Yeah. So it's something that everyone expects.
So there's an expectation.
Absolutely. We're seeing that, as you mentioned, on RFPs and stuff more of where is the data, where is it stored, retention policies, and even now anonymizing, the ability to anonymize the data. So maybe I don't want to completely purge it because I want that in there for some statistics and whatnot, but anonymizing it so I don't know that was Jane Doe's move 3 years ago, but I know somebody moved from point A to point B, for
We have
example.
somebody, have a couple questions or comments over here.
So what we've done with the requests that we've been getting, and we've noticed that we're getting more of them all the time regarding our technology, our data, where it's stored, how it's handled, our emails. We're even being asked now about our mobile phones and the securing of the mobile phones, because we have our emails available on those as well. What we did is we asked our IT provider to create a booklet for us. So we now have basically a packet that anytime someone asks us about our recovery, our secure, and all of that, we have that document that we can attach, because I can't go to them each time and say, how do we do this? How are you doing this? What are you protecting us on that? So we've actually created this document that we can say, please see attached. And that's been helpful to us.
Excellent. And we're going to be talking about the importance of recovering, because we're not robots. We'll make mistakes. So our ability to recover from, I'll call it conflict resolution, is really paramount. And that kind of operation, that kind of performance is a great way, and talk about a tool to solidify your relationship with your corporate client. I have another comment over here.
Yeah, just a comment. Wendy Galati with Live and Local in Vancouver. I find it's a really fine line to your point of the clients are asking for the security, which, I think as a corporation, you want to be cognizantly very aware of that. However, when they're asking us for data and saying, can you give me the last 5 years worth of data, but we don't want to, it's sort of at odds with one another. So I think that's sort of the new challenge that we're going into, is that they want very specific numbers and details of what happened 3 years ago, but I'm not supposed to know what happened 3 years ago. So, like, so maybe it's just me, right? We're just going to be sorry, right? Because I don't know.
Brilliant point. Thank you. Gordon.
Yeah, just throwing in the legal perspective on that, because it does raise a really interesting issue, which is when do you delete data from your systems? Because the GDPR requires you to have policies in place about when you will get rid of personal data. So that's a conversation that has to take place with the client to find out when their needs will end, and it may be 5 years, it may be 7 years, it may be tax records, so that affects it too. But these are definitely conversations that have to take place between supplier and client, and then put into a policy that if you're ever audited for data privacy purposes, you can show we're compliant with this policy, and that's why these policy rules are in place.
Excellent point. And really, Gordon, it comes down to managing expectations and then codifying it in writing. So thank you for sharing that.
And Susan, can I just say, Gordon's running a legal clinic on data today at 1:15 in the Higgins room upstairs.
All right. So again, weaving together all the great sessions throughout the Euro Conference and finding those common threads. Thank you.
Absolutely. And to your points, we're hearing more now, starting to hear about the ability for the employee, the end consumer, the customer themselves saying, I'd like you to forget about me and get about my data. So there's the GDPR and the corporate policy and your corporate policy, and now this ability for the employee to say 2 days later, I didn't exist, forget about me. And how do you balance all that? It's interesting times for sure.
Can I make a comment on duty of care, just before we move on? Patty from Cultural Chemistry. I'm an intercultural trainer and coach, and we know, and I have another coach sitting just behind me, and we know that expatriate coaching and cross-cultural training really makes a huge difference to the success of the assignment. We all know that about 40% of assignments fail or fail to sort of deliver fully because somebody in the relationship is unhappy with the assignment. But the comment that I hear most when I talk to DSPs and RMCs is that we don't provide cross-cultural training because our clients don't ask for it. And I really think that the global mobility industry needs to actually take on a role as educator to say how important this is. And, you know, I'm always trying to persuade people that it works. I did a webinar for Euro a couple of months ago on the impact of COVID on expatriates and how many of them wanted coaching support, that they felt really isolated, really alienated, and left out of the picture. And I feel like people know that, but we're not prepared to push back at clients and say, but you need this. And I do have clients who make it mandatory for their expats to have cross-cultural training. So why can't everybody do that?
And just
Sorry, I'm just going to leap ahead and say, and just on that note about reducing the costs of administration and so on, I also know that coaching is much more effective when it's delivered on a weekly basis, but I've still got clients who insist that I travel hours and sit with somebody for 8 hours in a room and deliver it face to face. And that's not green. It's not effective either, but it's definitely not green.
All right, and thank you for sharing that. We're going to keep moving on, but thank you for sharing about the importance of high-touch services that we're going to get to in a moment. Bryony.
Hi, Val Gascoigne from Fagaman. Just a very quick one, going back to the data. We actually, listening to the clients and their requirements on data privacy and storage, we actually now have separate servers in Europe and in the US so that information, we can actually choose when we're setting up a case whether that sits on a server in Europe or in the US so that customers and clients know where their data is being stored. And we do have a very occasional individual from a client where we actually have to work his case completely on paper, and it can't be worked by anybody that's got anything to do with a particular country in Asia. The files can't go anywhere near the server, and he's completely off the books.
Well, thank you for sharing that example.
So it's a lot, yeah. I think we're at automation. So really, how do we reduce the time spent on, I'll say, administrative type tasks, and how can we get better at being high touch and spending that time? If we can automate those administrative tasks, we have more time to be more high touch or strategic work with our customers.
And that's a great point, Karen. That really leads us to our next slide, where we talk about the importance of interconnectivity, reliance, an ecosystem, and what that looks like. So Becky, if you would talk to us.
Sure. And I know we already talked about a little bit about flexibility, but I think what you'll find is that your clients you have a whole spectrum, and let's talk about specifically their technology journey. You might have clients that are still doing everything on spreadsheets and want weekly phone calls, and then you have other clients that just want APIs and say, whatever you're doing, I want your system to just talk to my system on the back end. I don't need to talk to you. I'll just look in the system and see what I want. And then you've got a lot of clients kind of in between. So as you're working with different clients, you may need to tailor how you're interacting with them and the flexibility of your solutions to be able to meet them where they want you to meet them.
So essentially, by opening up the aperture, and like Isabel Crudell said, is to collaborate unconventionally across the industry spectrum, across industry boundaries, companies and our industry will be better adept to add value to the end user of our services and to the client HR corporate decision maker.
Yeah. So moving along, doing more with less, and this feeds into that automation conversation, because I think at corporations, a lot of times we're having the automation conversation is, yes, I want to free up headcount so people can focus on more strategic work and do less of the administrative work, but also sometimes it's because they just don't want as much headcount. And they say, well, if I free up the work, then we can lay 3 people off, which is the unfortunate reality sometimes. And I would say to that, the importance of upskilling and training and saying, well, if part of your job is going to get outsourced, like what more can you be doing? Can you become more strategic? How are you adding value? And just kind of thinking 3 steps ahead of what does the future look like and how are we preparing for it?
So as service providers, anticipating what our client needs and then talking about it, communicating it. Don't hide it, keep it within your own silo, share it with the ecosystem. In a moment, we're actually going to define what an ecosystem means.
Yeah, doing that more with less really means we have to be flexible, right? We can't keep doing what we're doing today and the ways we're doing things and then also achieve doing more with less, right? So, supposedly maybe reducing headcounts, but then that just means that people left behind are still doing more. So thinking of creative ways, being flexible in how you do your jobs, working with other providers in the ecosystem, as Becky mentioned, and as well as being flexible, meeting your customer and client needs, because they're all going to be a little bit different.
So the interesting thing, adapting to new ways of working, remote and hybrid, you can look at it from a global mobility perspective. Again, are people saying, okay, I don't want to go on a traditional long-term expat assignment. I'd want like a different arrangement type setup. Employees within your own organization, I don't want to come to the office 5 days a week. How are you accommodating that? But then even how are you interfacing with your clients and your other supplier partners? And I know I had my tax provider come visit from India, and he came to New Jersey, where my office was, and he was only going to be there on Wednesday. Well, Wednesday's not normally a day I'm in the office, but I knew he was coming from a long way, and I said, I'll make sure I get into the office that day. It's important we see each other face to face. And he was actually saying, well, I'm going to California next, and I have clients there, and I was hoping to meet them in person, but that's not the day that they're in the office, and I'm not going to be able to meet with them. He said, what's the point of this business trip in the first place? I should have just done a Zoom call from India. And so
Can anybody relate to that?
So how are you engaging with, again, all the different stakeholders in a meaningful way, knowing that we're all working a little differently now?
So when you think about our wonderful industry, it's an orchestra. And the orchestra includes a variety of different instrumentalists, from percussions to woodwinds to brass to percussion. If something, if one or more of those instrumentalists are not playing in key, it doesn't sound good. So really, each of us has a stake in the ecosystem, and our ability to interrelate and rely on each other really becomes key.
And I think that relying on each other goes to that needing a more consultative approach. I know, kind of sitting where I am, it's an eagle-eye view of what I'm doing, what my company's doing, where is their need. And the reason I go out to corporate benchmarking groups or to the supplier network or to read white papers is because I need to see what else is out there. We're always growing, we're always changing, and I'm looking for that proactive feedback to say, hey, you know, this client is doing this cool thing. Have you considered it? Or this, you might want to anticipate, we see this trend coming down the pike. Is this something that a tweak you'd like to make in your program? So really looking more towards that kind of push notification and that feedback back up to us to say, you might want to think about this.
So Karen, talk to us about what an ecosystem is, and she put together a really great diagram of what it was and how it's transforming. So talk to us about that, Karen.
Yeah, so you can see on the left side, that image is really, I'll say, the more traditional historical ecosystem, more flat and linear, where the employee or the HR had to talk to the various suppliers and share the same information over and over and over again. And sort of each supplier working in their own silo. And then looking at the image on the right, how it's really come together, putting that individual, your end customer, in the center, and all of us working around to support that person in their move, whatever that may be, remote work, long-term assignment, anything in between, commuters, all of it. And sharing data, so that employee only has to share their information once. And through those integrations, the ecosystem, we can share the data with appropriate people that need it, and even sharing data between suppliers as appropriate, but also protecting the data that isn't needed. So, for example, you may have your temporary living provider may need to know that the person has the appropriate work permit or visa to be in country and be there, so they can secure housing, but they don't need to know the details of that, so they may see some of that anonymized data.
Excellent, Karen. And speaking to the diagram on the right, the customer's at the center, not the HR decision maker. Our ability to work within that circle with all of us within the ecosystem will make us a bit stronger and more valuable as an industry. And there's a Fortune magazine article, magazine that just came out with a PwC review of the best companies to work for and the most successful companies. And interestingly, the front runners are more than 2 times more likely to generate 60% of their revenue through ecosystems. Interesting fact.
So it goes back to that last slide of partnerships and working together and how we can all support each other.
So we believe, and the data has proven, that ecosystems fuel success. So Becky, if you want to talk about that, please.
Yeah, so really this slide, it's got a lot of information on it. You can read it at your leisure. How to be a successful player in the talent mobility ecosystem. So just to kind of touch on some high points from each of the different topics. So thought leader, right? Are you putting out white papers? Are you collaborating with others? Are you seen as a thought leader in the industry, as an innovator? Are you sharing knowledge? Are you crowdsourcing? Everybody has a little bit different of expertise that they can add. I know a lot of the successful presentations I've gone to, it's a collaboration between different types of supplier partners. So I've been to some great ones where it's one person from tax, one person from immigration, and one person from employment law, all speaking with the common thread. And those are great because you get a lot of bang for your buck when you can see all of those and the breadth and depth that all the different providers can bring. But again, they're working together collaboratively to bring you all this information.
Well, that also sends a message to you, Becky, is look how my providers are working together. They're not working separately. They're not being combative. They're not all trying to, I'll say, have the spotlight. They're working collaboratively, and they're relying on each other's area of expertise.
Yeah. So communication, and we touched on this a little bit, but what does your client want? How do they want to be communicated to? What are the milestones? What's the preferred mode of communication? And even, for example, I implemented a new technology a few years ago, and at that time I had a certain vision in mind for what I wanted that technology to do and how we were going to leverage it. And come 3 years later, we took a look at the system and said, oh, gee, you know, we're not really using it how we thought we were using it, and they've had some enhancements. So we sat down with our provider, and they said, let us show you what the system can do now. We've been making updates along the way, and can you better leverage it? And it was that communication flow both ways that enabled us to really sit down and do that holistic overview and say, okay, let's tweak some things, and we can get better use out of the system. Trust is really important. Susan touched on it a little earlier. I've had some supplier partners in place over 20 years because we have a really strong relationship with them. And things will happen. People make mistakes. There's things within our control. There's things outside of our control. And I think a lot of times what's most important is your recovery from those setbacks. And I know whenever something happens, my first thing is let's do a debrief. What happened? Why did it happen? What can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And you can gauge, you know, how our supplier is kind of responding to you. Is it a lot of finger pointing versus a kind of a more of an acknowledgement and an ownership piece? And then do we have that structured recovery? And if we kind of get through that path and everyone was very open and transparent, then I feel much more safe and secure knowing that this is a really valued partner for me. I'd like to keep this relationship going.
So taking accountability and learning going forward.
Yeah. Technology, we've touched on it a lot. I think what's interesting is I've had companies come to me and say, well, what are your technology needs? And I'll say, well, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. Like, you tell me what's out there. What can you do? And I'll tell you how my program's set up, but I need you to tell me what you can do, and then we can figure out how the technology can support what I'm doing or even enhance and improve what I'm doing. And so I think there's a piece of, please showcase to me what you have, but then when we're coming to a common solution, try to make it as standard as possible with as little customization, because then otherwise you kind of get locked into the technology, and now I want to make a policy change, and it's really hard to because it's customized a lot. So I think there's this nice balance between kind of standard and customized, but you're only going to get there, again, with mutual feedback from both sides.
I think adding to that, Becky, I'd say, you know, that, again, that data is important. We talked about that in integrations, right? So how Becky running her program at ADP, each of us doing a piece of that, supporting her, how can we make that easier for her, all sharing our data so she has all of it in one view, as opposed to coming to each of our systems and our technology and seeing the data that related to what we're doing. So integrating that, all being part of her ecosystem to help her have that visualization across her whole program, I think is key as well.
Yeah, great point.
On the data piece, and again, we've talked a lot about data retention, data purging, you know, data breaches that can really hurt a brand name, and we've all gotten that email that, oh, your sensitive information has been compromised by this company, and we suggest you change your password. And for example, at a company like ADP, where we're dealing with millions of people's sensitive payroll data information, we wouldn't want that to get out. But so again, data protection is critical. But even this question of what data are you tracking? What data do you want to be able to report on? And again, this kind of my ask is, what are you seeing that other clients are doing? If DE&I is a hot topic and you're seeing that a lot of people are starting to track the gender of the employees on assignment because they want to be able to say, well, of the different genders, what percentage are going on assignments, what aren't, if that's important to your company. If you're seeing other companies start to track that data and report it, you know, maybe you can go back to your client and say, hey, we're starting to anticipate a new trend in the industry and people are starting to track this. Maybe you'd want to consider that too, because if I don't, what's going to happen? At some point, somebody's going to ask me for that data, and then it's a big scramble, a big emergency. I'm running to you. We're all working over the weekend to gather all this data when I could have already started proactively tracking it. So really anticipating what are those trends and trying to proactively implement it into the program. Adaptability, again, we spoke about how different clients have different missions, values, culture, and how can you really learn best your client's culture to be able to service their employees? We always say on the corporate side, we want our supplier to be an extension of ourselves and to be the mouthpiece of the organization. And if you don't really know necessarily what their culture is, how are you going to successfully do that? And kind of even more tricky is, even within one company, you might have many different cultures. I might have this business unit that's very cost conscious and doesn't want to spend anything on their employees, and they're like, go relocate and figure it out yourself. And I have this business unit that says, money is no object, give them whatever they want. And therefore, you're going to be dealing with both of those employees, and you're going to need to adjust and be agile to properly support them. So, I've heard of some companies that are having their supplier network actually attend basically kind of like their new hire onboarding, so they can really have a good, thorough understanding of their client and how they operate. So again, you can be more successful in kind of being that extension of them.
So, Becky, I'm reminded your programs work directly with your provider. You don't work through a third-party provider or an RMC. So the reality is that your supplier partners can go to you directly to ask about the company culture and the general profile of the transferees. What do we as service providers do when we're working through an RMC? How do we manage that, and how do we go about getting that information?
Yeah, and it's a good question, because that can be a challenge, right? You may be kind of second, third, or fourth removed from the global mobility manager, who's expecting certain things from you, but you're not hearing it firsthand. So, I think one thing is to remind that third party. Remind them, say, I really want to service this client as best as possible. What information can you give me? What information can be passed down? Is there any way I can talk to them directly? But ask, right? Ask for it. They won't realize or remember that might be helpful to you as an organization in servicing your client. You have to remind them.
Yeah, great point. So if you don't ask, you don't get. So question for the group. Does anybody like to talk about how they've worked within the kind of the new or the transformational ecosystem and share what the challenges have been for you? Nobody. Okay. And how are you balancing? I know we all believe very passionately about the importance of high-touch services. How are you balancing that in your organization with the emerging need? About 100% of the people in the room said that the emerging need or technology has become more of a integrated into your organization. How are you balancing the two?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, Susan, because we do talk a lot internally about you want to leverage technology, but you can't take away the human contact and the high touch. So I'm curious what the audience has to say.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Priyam from Helma. Actually, this is regarding your previous question, Susan, the challenges that we are facing in building this ecosystem. One of the things as a service provider is that there is a need to invest a lot, whether it is in new technology, whether in training staff, whether it is in sustainability certification. But at the end of the day, a lot of the clients are looking to lower costs. And I understand that in the long run, that this makes the team more efficient, it's good for the planet, but is it always the best for the revenue, is the question that we often get asked by the manager. So how are you meeting up to that challenge?
I think it's a balance, and this was actually...
Thank you, Priyam.
Yeah, it was also discussed in the Sustainability Symposium, and I think well, I'll put this example out there. During COVID, household goods shipment costs increased across the board. And you couldn't do anything about it, and you had to go back to the business and say, costs have gone up. If you want to move these household goods, this is just the cost of doing business. And they swallowed it, and they said, okay, talk to finance, increase the budget, you have to do it. And I think as more and more companies make sustainability a strategic objective, they know there's a cost to it, there can be a cost to it. There are some creative solutions where there's actually not a cost to it, like these discard and donate programs. But if there's a cost to it and it increases its importance, they'll be more likely to put more fees to it. But we've talked about kind of from the sustainability perspective, kind of creating an industry standard. And I think if I don't know, kind of a long-term goal this is, but if everybody says we're going to implement all these sustainable solutions across all of our programs, costs go up for everybody. That's the new cost of doing business. So one lens to look at it.
I have a couple questions here.
So I'm just curious, because we talk about sustainability, and yes, costs go up, and I get that. And we look at how do we provide more value to you, the client. But my question is more inside of the sustainability issue. When we have hydroelectricity, or I don't know what term you use over here, that has increased 20, 30%, and yet what I find is that companies are looking for us to maintain rate or maintain costs, but there seems to be a gap in the accountability of the actual transferee and their behavior inside of my, for example, corporate housing, where I'm trying to keep my costs down, but he likes to have the heat on and the windows open. And so when we push back on things like that, I'm just wondering if there's a piece that's missing. We all want to do it, but it's trickling down to the actual user of the ecosystem. What's being done in the background to sort of educate them that they have a role to play.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of responsibility on the global mobility manager to educate them, but probably also to incentivize them to change behavior. And there could be a cost savings relationship put in place between the company and the employee. Hey, our corporate housing costs are going to go down. If you do A, B, and C, we'll let you share in on those savings. And I do find that that's a successful way to change behavior, but you're right, there needs to be discussion around it.
And I think taking that consultative approach as service providers, going to your corporate HR and saying, I have the data in my local area that if the transferee does this, this is what it will do to save the planet, to save money, to incentivize the transferee. So again, the interrelationship and the reliance on each other, and by having some technology, then it'll save time for you, whatever the technology is, save time for you to be more consultative with your clients.
Right. And that trust and collaboration that you mentioned, right? So maybe you learn one of your clients has in place a program that incentivizes their transferees. They've really educated them. So you can take that feedback to your next client and say, this is an issue and we're trying to work together. Here's something you might want to consider. So it's all of that coming together.
We have another question here, a comment? Kathy.
Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
On this slide, Becky, that you put up, in our business, we cover all of those, but I think the most important is communication, because how can our clients know, to your point, Becky, what's new? What other features are coming along? What are we doing? How are we improving? And that's one of the things I realize is the communication piece is the most important.
It's a great point. And I think as Francis said yesterday so elegantly, we are the poets of the industry, and our ability to communicate that, clearly with some data in mind, but in a way that is influential and collaborative within the ecosystem and with the corporate decision maker will really will change the paradigm. Any other comments out there? I saw a couple other hands. So how do you get started?
Really just summarizing everything we've talked about in this session today, assessing where you're at. What is your current state of your business? How can you get better? The strategic partnership, data privacy, tools, technology, all of that. Looking at your operating model and flexibility. Do you have the flexibility? Can you do more with less? Can you do things in different ways? How are you partnering and collaborating with other providers? Really getting aligned on the purpose. Communication with that client. what is important to them, who are your proper stakeholders, and balancing, as Becky talked about, a few of you mentioned, how do you balance that technology that is so important to all of us? We want it to be convenient, but also that human touch. At the end of the day, I want somebody to know how I feel and that I've been heard. And then engaging in the ecosystem ultimately. So as a community, as the mobility community, coming up with our standards, driving these standards for sustainability is a good one. I know you mentioned you had a session the other day on that. The governance, really, how are we going to all work together and achieve the same goals, not only for our customers and our clients, but for our industry as a whole?
Oh, great points. And again, when it comes down to, it's all about alignment, alignment, alignment. And I think as Karen said so well, is when you look at the new ecosystem, that circle, the HR decision maker is actually in the circle too. In the center is the customer, is the end user of our services. So when I'll send Dom and Tad the information in this Fortune magazine article that a study done by PwC of the leading companies that are performance-based, those leading companies are two times more likely to be faster to go to market. They're 1.5 times more likely to be more flexible and agile. Number one was Cisco, by the way, and over 2.5 times more likely to have high levels of information. So we're hoping today, in summary, we help to explain why it's important for all of you, for all of us, the poets, to stand out in a fast-paced, turbulent, and in some cases chaotic landscape. We've talked about how to be a consultative player in the ecosystem and how, to Karen's point, how to do it with purpose. And we hope we've provided you with the tools on how to do so. Any other comments or questions before we close? And like the Guardians of the Galaxy, it's all finding the power that each of us have and to be empowered as an ecosystem to change the paradigm, to make an impact on the talent mobility ecosystem, and to really think beyond those boundaries. Thank you so much.
You all.